Welcome back. His Majesty King Charles made his first visit as head of the Commonwealth to Kenya 3 weeks ago, where he stopped short of apologising for the actions of British forces during the bloody Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s. He did, however, express his deepest regrets over the abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence that had taken place. Someone with a highly personal as well as an academic interest in the history of the emergency is the BBC former journalist Nicholas Rankin, who grew up in Kenya during the conflict, and his new book, Trapped in History, Kenya, Mau Mau and Me, blends memoir and scholarship to create a vivid portrait of that fraught time. My great pleasure to welcome Nicholas Rankin. Good to see you on GB News. Who is trapped in history in the title of your book?
We all are. Mm-hmm. You are, Michael, I am, everybody is. But in this case, the quote is from James Baldwin, and he says that people can be trapped in a history which, if they fail to understand, they can never be free of. Now, I grew up I was a child in Kenya, and it was a turbulent time. The emergency, which the king referred to, 1952 to 1960, was an armed uprising against the British colony. The Mau Mau emergency. Now, the term Mau Mau wasn't actually an African term. It may be a distortion of the Kikuyu word for oath, Muma. It's not sure, but it was the term that the Europeans used to describe this movement, this armed uprising. And it was a very turbulent period, and it was a violent rebellion followed by violent repression, for which many of the things that the king expressed regret. You know, he said, there is no excuse, is what he said in Nairobi a couple of weeks ago.
So essentially, the Mau Mau movement was a movement for independence, to throw over the British imperial rule. Indeed.
I mean, the history of Kenya is very recent in terms of, not in terms of world history. The whole human race evolved, we know with Leakey's discoveries out of East Africa, but in terms of white colonization, it's from the 1890s. And from the 1920s, you get a movement towards independence. Now, the fact is that there was a pyramid of dominance, if you like, in East Africa. You have, by the time we went there in the early 1950s, there's 50,000 white people, about 200,000 Asian people, Indians, people from Pakistan, all Indian, then called Asians, and then 5 million, more than 5 million African people. So Europeans, Asians, Africans. Now, why wouldn't 5 million people in their own country not want to get rid of the 50,000 people who are ruling them? Now, there was a constitutional way, but that got blocked. It wasn't understood. And if you repress legitimate means, you might get an explosion, and you did.
Let's briefly deal with the sort of violence on the two sides. What were some of the tactics of the rebels under the Mau Mau rebellion?
Well, here we're into the area of atrocity, Michael. Yes. I mean, the fact is that horrible things were done, okay? Chopping people and disemboweling people and horrible
massacres of families.
Massacres of... these are the things that happen in warfare, you know, and all sorts of people are capable of it. It's disturbing stuff, Michael. It's disturbing to write about.
And what were the British forces?
Well, and then what happens is they were accused of detention, torturing people to see whether they could confess or whether they were Mau Mau, betray where other people were. So you get one kind of abuse leading to another kind of abuse.
And collective punishment.
Collective punishment.
Something we're familiar with at the moment as a concept.
Indeed. And this meant that if there was a murder, people's cattle would be taken away, their bicycles would be confiscated, people would be moved. There were all kinds of injustices and difficulties. People were locked up in detention camps. They were screened, as the term was, to find who was loyal, who was not. And abuses took place in this because some of the lowest of the low were employed in these places. Not everybody was like that. Not everybody, you know, not all Africans were involved in the trust. Of course they weren't. And not all Europeans were involved in it. But these things happened. And we have to acknowledge them, and that's partly what the book is about. And
it matters to you very much, it seems, that you spent part of your childhood in Africa. Africa is still very much in your heart and soul.
Indeed. It made me. I mean, I grew up there. I became a human being there. This is where my consciousness began. You don't know anything as a child. You're innocent and you're ignorant. But when you're an adult, you know you're not innocent, and it's your duty not to be ignorant. So you have to find out about the system that you're in now, or that you were in then. You have to try to understand it. As the James Baldwin quote says, if you don't try to understand both sides, or three sides of the conflict, you're not going to be able to escape from it.
You've come to this subject after many years, after many decades. You might have written this, I suppose, at any time. Has it been a very painful process for you?
Yes, it has.
You've suffered.
It's been quite difficult to do on several levels. On a personal level, during lockdown, I think my wife would probably say I went mad, more or less. Grew my hair, but you're reading about terrible things and exploring terrible things, and then you have to acknowledge what your country has done too. This can be difficult. I mean,
and that you were unwittingly a part of it.
You're part of it.
You were sitting on the top of the pyramid.
You're in a system that you don't, as a child, you're really a child. You're not responsible for it. But as an adult, you are responsible for looking at it and trying to understand it, and the effects of it, and the lasting effects of it, because these things don't go away. I mean, Kenya's celebrating next month, 60 years of its independence. So this royal visit, which was a kind of, clearing of the way, the king was taken through a museum, the Ujamaa Museum, and he was taken through the Hall of Fame and the Hall of Shame. So we have to look at the fame and the shame of the British Empire too. And, look at it. It's not a problem. You just have to acknowledge what was done and the grief that it caused, and there were good things, of course, and there were bad things.
Yes, I mean, can you say a sentence or two more about the balance, how you would regard the British Empire, how we should think about it?
Look, Michael, our lives, one's own life goes into history, as my childhood toys are now in the Museum of Childhood. It's absurd. The British Empire is gone. If you look at it, it lasted 300 years. It's now disappearing in time. What will remain of the British Empire? The best thing of the British Empire, the best result, is the English language. I mean, English is a world language because of the British Empire. The Americans were part of the first empire. It's spoken in India, Africa, Australia, everywhere. And it's a language that's drawn from everywhere, all other languages. Its roots are everywhere. And it's a marvellous language. And our job as writers is a way to serve the English language. That is a result of empire, in a sense. But that's, as it were, the honey from the beehive, not the mess and anger of the beehive.
You say that the empire has gone. Indeed it has. I wonder whether the Commonwealth is going. I mean, the royal family must feel a little bit reluctant to go around the Commonwealth now because they're having a bit of a hard time. Some places they may be jeered. Some places they have to stick to these formulaic non-apologies. Right. It's quite tricky for them, isn't it?
Well, of course, but they have to suck it up in a way. I mean, this is what... Look at the Commonwealth. What was interesting the other week was the cenotaph. When it's not just the prime ministers and the royals that go, the Commonwealth send their people and they stand there. You've got to understand, the Second World War, the British Empire came together. People of all colours, all races, from India, from the Caribbean, they served, they fought, they died, they put their money into buying Spitfires. And the thing about the Commonwealth is, I mean, it may be seen as Empire Mark II, but there are countries who are joining it that were never part of the British Empire.
Absolutely. And
they turned up at the cenotaph too. And so what the King was trying to say in his speech at the end of it was, look, we have to get over this and carry on in friendship. And that's what we have to do. You can't just sit there in enmity forever. Once former enemies have to talk to each other.
We have to escape from the trap because, just to remind you, the book is called Trapped in History, Kenya, Mau Mau and Me. Many thanks, Nicholas Rankin, particularly for coming in. That's on Sunday lunchtime.